Institute members, corporate clients and guests, hello and welcome to the Institute of Managers and Leaders Australia and New Zealand and our second quarter development day and today's second session with Stephen Gibb. I can't wait to get into it. Before I start, I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, both either in Australia and New Zealand, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you so much today for joining us at the Institute of Managers and Leaders. We've got a proud tradition for 80 years of being the voice of management and leadership across Australia and New Zealand. We're the largest community of management professionals providing coaching, support, services, networking, and opportunities to learn and grow your management and leadership skills. Of course, all of our learning is practical, it's engaging, and it's designed to be relevant for the workplace. So the skills that you learn through IML, either through our leadership programs, our workshops, our webinars, are all designed to be practical skills and being able to translate that back straight into the workplace. And of course, today's session with Development Day is no different. What we try and provide you with is an opportunity to learn from 3 facilitators with IML, and also accompanied by an action plan. And I know we've put together an action plan for this session too for you, and I hope you've all got that. If you don't have it, please type in the chat box and we will send you a link to the action plan to be able to use today, so that you can take the learning from today and implement it straight into both your personal and professional life. Today's session, Bounce Forward Through Adaptability, really, as I said earlier, refers to our shifting mindset from being reactive to becoming proactive. And we all know over the last 2 to 3 years has been a challenging time, both personally and professionally for everyone, as we've gone through the pandemic and the post-pandemic phase. And I certainly empathise with all of our members and our corporate clients and guests today that it has been a challenging time, but what we want to do is look forward, and adaptability, we feel, is a very current, relevant and present topic for people and workplaces today. So without further ado, let's go into session 2, rediscover your adaptability and flourish beyond fear. The learning outcomes that we're targeting today, and I know that Stephen really wants to focus on for you and what he wants you to take away from today's session, is to develop an understanding of what causes languishing and imposter syndrome. It's to create a 2-step framework for rediscovering adaptability. It's exploring 5 techniques to prepare yourself for change, and it's to develop the courage and motivation to uncover and face your hidden fears. I'm delighted to welcome Stephen to IML, and I can see him there on the screen. Stephen has, over 15 years has been working with the world's largest software companies, including Oracle and Adobe. Stephen changed jobs and employers with unusual regularity, pursuing the extrinsic motivation of money and prestige above all else. Stephen also observed the detrimental effects change can have on both teams and individuals. Stephen stepped off the corporate ladder and became focused on understanding his situation and how to improve it. As he developed greater awareness of his thoughts and his emotions, he realised unconscious behaviour was responsible for much of his discomfort and began uncovering and overcoming the assumptions and beliefs that were driving it. He freed himself from the fear controlling him and learned the value of adaptability. Immediately, the world became a less threatening place, and he felt safe to experiment, make mistakes, and continually learn from life's challenges. Stephen is now committed to using that experience to help others uncover and overcome the hidden fears that hold them back. And it's with great joy and a great privilege for the Institute to welcome Stephen Gibb for our second session today at Development Day. Stephen, I'll hand over to you now.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sam. Can I just check with you, Sam, that you can hear me okay and it's clear?
I can hear you, Stephen, and it was remiss of me also not to mention that please write, think about the questions that Stephen, when he's talking throughout the session, because we will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. The session will also be recorded and sent to you all, so you will have a recording of it. So I just wanted to get that out because I forgot about that. But Stephen, we can hear you loud and clear.
Beautiful, thank you, Sam. And thank you everyone who's taken time out to come and listen and learn from me today. It's an absolute honour to speak to anybody at any time. So thank you to each of you wherever you are and for whatever reason brought you here and whatever your interest is. As Sam said, my name's Stephen, and it's always quite awkward to hear someone talk about you and tell your backstory without being able to give comment. But lovely introduction, Sam. Thank you so much. I'm an adaptability coach, which means I help people overcome the thoughts and beliefs and assumptions and stories that hold them back from realizing their potential. And I do that really by supporting 3 products, if you want. Number 1 is the development of self-awareness. Number 2 is the development of self-belief. And number 3 is the rediscovery of adaptability. And we'll talk a little bit later about how it's not teaching people adaptability, but how it's about rediscovering adaptability. And I do this work with individuals, with groups and teams, and with entire organizations. And I'm very fortunate to be able to do it. In fact, this work is in many ways my redemption. As Sam said, I spent 15 years in the corporate world leading large teams of technologists and management consultants and architects and design thinkers. And too often I saw people plateau when their potential and their skill far exceeded where they found themselves in their career. And that plateauing turning into disengagement. And I lacked at that time the skill, the knowledge, the awareness, and the understanding of how to lift people off of that plateau and get them back on an upward trajectory to where I could clearly see that they belonged and where their skills dictated that they should be performing. And now the work that I do allows me to rectify that. And it's such exciting work to be able to do. So today's session is going to be very theory-based, but under normal circumstances, if we had more time, as Sam alluded to, I'm a big fan of practicality. You know, there's this thing called the knowing doing gap. It's easy for us to read books, go to seminars and get information, but the rubber really hits the road when we can take that information and make it practical. So at the end of the session today, Sam will be able to introduce you to a practical session that we are going to offer to the members of IML to help you get that rubber on the road with the methodology, with the approach that I take to help people flourish beyond fear. And that methodology is something that I was fortunate enough to learn from 2 amazing professors of psychology at Harvard University, Dr. Robert Keegan and Dr. Lisa Lahey. And it's their model of immunity to change, which I brought to the market using some of the experiential models that I used to deliver when I was in the corporate world working in technology. So let me introduce that to you. Let me introduce a little bit more about myself. And again, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. If you had known me 3 years ago, this is what you would have seen. I was simultaneously the person on the left, looking at my team, wondering why everyone wasn't performing, and also the person on the right, struggling, overwhelmed, and unable to perform at my best. I'd just gotten married. I had just had a daughter. And for anyone that's married or has children, you'll know that there is no manual for either of those roles. I'd also just taken a new role at Adobe. I had a $250 million target to meet. I had an amazing large team of highly tenured, highly experienced, highly competent and capable individuals, and a growth target of 66%. I was expected to find innovative new ways to take this business, which was already highly successful, to new levels. All of these things caused me to be in a state of struggle. Every day it felt like I was looking through this fogged up windscreen at the world around me. I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't focus, I couldn't spend any duration of time working on any one task. Even the simplest things became almost impossible. Like when you log in to any of the digital services we all use today, you type in your username, you type in your password, and they helpfully send you a 6-digit code to your phone. Now, I couldn't take that 6-digit code and then move the 2 seconds it took me to type it into the laptop. I couldn't remember 6 digits for 2 seconds. And now when I do that almost every day of my life at the moment, I have a wry smile, acknowledging that I can do it again, but also recognizing that at some point in my life, something was far wrong. Now, more acutely, I was anxious, I was stressed perpetually. It always sat right back here in the back of my mind. I was always worried about what tomorrow was going to bring. And there was no spectre on the horizon of tomorrow. It was just a fearful day. every day. I felt like an imposter, not just at work, but as a father and as a husband. And that's challenging when 3 of the most fundamental roles that I had as a man, I didn't feel comfortable in. But most disconcertingly, I didn't know what had changed or when, and I didn't know what to do about it. I've since learned that I've reached what I've begun calling the adaptable edge, and this is the name of the organisation that I now run. And the adaptable edge is the point at which our circumstances and situations of our life brings to the surface the fears that we've been suppressing for often decades of our life. And with that, making us feel uncomfortable, stressed, anxious, but also impairing our ability to perform. Under threat, under worry, under danger, under fear, we're cognitively impaired. We're less productive, we're less creative, and our ability to create and recall memory is far reduced. So it quite quickly made obvious what was happening to me. It quite quickly showed me why I was struggling. Now that's quite an abstract topic, so let me try and make it a little bit more concrete for you with a metaphor. So normally if this was an interactive session, I would ask, is anyone thinking about sharks at the moment? And every time the answer is no, and why would you be? There's no reason to be thinking about sharks as we sit here doing a webinar in the comfort of our offices or our homes. But when we set foot in the ocean, sharks and all manner of other underwater creatures become a very real consideration. And when something touches our leg under the water, we have this disproportionate reaction to what it might be. And whether we're in the water to swim and perform, or we're in the water to relax or to have fun with our children, we can't do that thing with all of our presence, all of our conscious attention, because we're distracted by this possibility that we might get eaten by a shark. Now, death by shark is such a rare occurrence compared to all the other stuff we do in our life. It's completely inappropriate for us to be that fearful and for us to be affected in that way. But we are, because the situations and the conditioning that comes with us as human beings causes us to be fearful of that situation. And the same is true in many, many facets of our life. We have a huge number of fears based upon our previous experiences of life, which come to the surface when situations and circumstances that remind us of them are presented to us as we move through the world. We carry a lot of this baggage about with us, and it's exhausting. Now, the fears that came up for me was the marriage that I was in. I recognised that I wasn't happy in. And having a daughter brought to the surface the risk of that becoming a toxic relationship and the impact that might have upon her. Now, I had the fear of being alone, of having to separate that marriage and be alone for the health of my daughter and for my own health, but also the fear of being separated from my daughter if I had to do that. Similarly, in this situation at Adobe, where I was surrounded by these amazingly high-performing individuals, I had this fear of not being good enough, this fear of losing the career that I had built over a long period of time. And it was all of these fears together, which were right in front of my eyes based upon the circumstances I was going through, which were causing me to be impaired cognitively, impaired physically, and just to feel terrible. Now, I don't tell you this story so that you go and reconsider your relationships or that you reconsider your job. I tell you them to show you just how insidious the experiences that we've had in our life and the fear that they represent can be all of a sudden when our circumstances change, as was the case for me. Now, what I lacked was the ability to change in response to my circumstances as they changed. Well, it's not strictly true to say that I lacked adaptability. What's more true is that I couldn't use it because I had it. I had adaptability, I just wasn't able to use it. So let's quickly work on some definitions. So adaptability is the ability to respond in response to change happening all around us. And LinkedIn in 2021 identified it as the most important skill we can have, similar to what the World Economic Forum said a little bit earlier. In the professional world, adaptability is important. It's incredibly important. In fact, it can be a competitive advantage as an individual and when you have adaptability as a team or an organisation. And as I said, we're all inherently adaptable. If you think about ourselves as children, we move through the world without fear. We try and explore new experiences. We try and explore new things. We touch a flame and that's how we find out it's hot. But over time, we slowly become concreted into our comfort zone, the area that we want to stay in because we're familiar with it and we know what's going to happen as we move through. Let me give you an example of how we are still inherently adaptable. And let's take it from what's happened in the last couple of years. Video conferencing, like this, has been around for 10 or 15 years. And the best that we could think to do as humans was to move from huddling around a telephone while another group of people huddled around a telephone in some other office, to huddling around instead a monitor while some other group of people huddled around a monitor in their office. Then all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, a once-in-a-100-year event happens and we're all distributed back into our homes and our adaptability takes hold. All of a sudden, we're all using Zoom to Zoom individuals and Zoom teams without even thinking about doing it. We're also Zooming for yoga, we're also Zooming for Pilates, all manner of different exercises. We even now in Australia have a game show based upon the ability for the audience to dial in from home and participate in the game show live. And I tell you that story to show that our adaptability is still inherent, it's still there. And that example was, we had no choice. When we have no choice, our adaptability shows up. But often, as I did, we do have a choice. Our choice can be to avoid what's happening all around us. It can be to accept the relationship we're not happy with. It can be to feel like an imposter in our role and just handle the discomfort that comes with that. Often with tools of avoidance, like vices of alcohol, drugs, social media, whatever our particular tool is, just to make ourselves feel a little bit better. But what we need to do is find a way to unlock that adaptability, even when we have options. Unlock that adaptability such that we don't need to be faced with once-in-a-100-year circumstances in order to unlock the potential and the possibility that we now see through video conferencing. So when I talk about fear, when I talk about these stories, these assumptions and beliefs that hold us back from being adaptable, what do I mean? Well, we're all born with a core set of fears, and those are activated in response to the experiences we have in life. So for me, my fear of being alone stemmed from an experience with my dad. When I was 10 and I'd been fighting with my sister, having been sent to my room, my dad said, "If you don't change your behaviour, I'll leave this family." And I remember that night crying myself to sleep, wondering what it would be like if mum and dad were no longer around. That stayed with me as an inherent story which represented a fear of being alone and caused me to feel the need to hold all relationships together at all costs, even at cost to my own needs, wants and well-being. The other story that I had that held me or kept me pursuing these ever-increasing levels of status and salary in the corporate world was observing my dad, a man who took himself from a working class background, was incredibly successful in life, and used to teach me that status and money were some of the most important things we can have. That stayed with me as well. And the fear of rejection of my dad, of not being able to have status and continue to get progress in the corporate world, kept me stuck in that cycle that many people find themselves in, taking job after job just to get a more senior title. Now, all of these fears live as stories in our unconscious mind. And our unconscious mind is responsible for, ultimately, our survival. It governs 95% of all the actions we take and decisions that we make in the interest of keeping us safe. The problem is that some of those decisions aren't optimal for us. Some of the beliefs it has about what's dangerous or what's threatening aren't true. Another example for me was when I was 10, maybe a little bit older, 11, I was asked to speak in front of a class. I was asked to recite some Robbie Burns poetry, and I was laughed off stage. I was ridiculed. And that developed for me a fear of rejection based upon exposing myself in public. And it took me a long time to overcome that story that I had to be able to do the work that I do now. So those stories all live in our unconscious mind. and they are referenced each time we're presented with a situation that's unfamiliar to us, and we have to decide what to do. We also have a conscious mind. Our conscious mind is where we set our aspirations and plan how we're going to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. Now, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind are meant to work together in lockstep, but often they're at odds with one another. The aspirations we set are often contradicted by the assumptions and beliefs and stories that we have about ourselves and about the world around us. A great example of that is New Year's resolutions, 92% of which fail. Now, it's all well and good to have an aspiration to be fit and healthy and to take a brute force approach to getting up every morning to go to the gym at 6 AM. But if you haven't reconciled the reason why you're not fit and healthy at the moment, if you haven't understood what's causing you to behave in the way which keeps you unhealthy, you're going to be like the 92%. You're going to fall back into those old habits very, very quickly. So let me make this really practical for you. If everyone can take a deep breath in for me and hold it. So that's a conscious decision to take a conscious action. Now, over time, you're going to start to feel uncomfortable. And that discomfort is going to grow, and it's going to grow, and it's going to grow. And you can let your breath out now. If you'd held your breath, it would have grown to the point where you could not hold your breath any longer. No conscious intent to hold your breath will overcome the unconscious need to breathe. Because your unconscious mind knows that if you don't get more oxygen, you're going to die. And that metaphorically applies to all areas of our life. We can put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, but if we haven't reconciled the understanding that we have about the world around us to align with that thing that we want to do, we're always going to be dragged back into that old behavior. And that is what's impeding our adaptability. And it's all happening beneath our conscious awareness. So why is this important at the moment? Well, change is happening around us faster than it ever has, and it's never going to happen this slowly again. The problem with that is that change is happening exponentially by virtue of the exponential change of technology all around us and its pervasiveness in our life. The problem is that human beings change linearly. So this exponential versus linear change rate creates this thing called the adaptation gap. And it's in that adaptation gap that we feel uncomfortable, we feel overwhelmed, we feel stressed, we feel anxious, and our performance is impaired. It inhibits our ability to operate and integrate in the world around us, limiting our potential effectively. I should say that change is not bad. Change, in fact, is the lifeblood of our potential. All of the possibility and opportunity created by change it's abundant all around us. And it's painful for me to see people not being able to observe and grasp onto that opportunity because of the psychology which is governing their behaviour. So let me give you a tangible example. With this increasing capability of technology, shareholders, board members, and people running organisations are expecting greater business performance, more profitability, more income, and everything to be done at a lower cost. Of course, technology allows for automation. Those pressures, those expectations are passed down as larger targets and an expectation that we can pivot or turn at any moment in response to an opportunity or a threat on the horizon. One of the largest things that I've seen in the last 2 years of work I've done, in the growth that is created by change, people are being promoted into roles of management that they're not prepared for. And that level of change from an individual contributor into a manager brings an enormous amount of fear, an enormous amount of story in front of the eyes of those individuals. And this is largely where imposter syndrome is coming from. Fear that they're not good enough, fear that they're not able, fear that they're not ready to perform this new role that they've been placed into. And corporate development largely is about offering new skills training. So we're great at providing technical skills. Here's how to delegate. Here's how to run a one-on-one. But we're not offering support in adaptive skills. We're not offering people the support to understand, how do you feel now about this new role you have to perform? And what are the stories that are creating fear or causing you to perceive threat or danger in the thing that's been put in front of you? And we need to get better at that. The investment that we've made, for example, in resilience is valuable and necessary, but it's no longer sufficient in order to help people deal with the causes of fear which are holding them back. I was going to ask what are the changes that are happening in your professional life, but maybe just contemplate that for yourself and we'll keep going in the interest of time. Because I'm a big fan of models and giving you something that you can reflect upon and use in the future to understand what exactly is going on when you might feel discomfort or overwhelm, stress or anxiety. So if we think about change, it initiates two of our core instincts, survival and growth. And survival, as I've mentioned earlier, is hundreds of times more potent in us than our instinct for growth. Change also creates two other things. It creates opportunity and it creates unknown or uncertainty. So let's traverse down the pillar of growth. So when there's opportunity in front of us, we're presented with desire. We want new things. We're also presented with expectation of ourselves or expectation of others of us. The way in which we alleviate desire or expectation is by taking action. And when we take action, we get results. Now, if growth was our only instinct, the world would be a beautiful place. We'd see loads of opportunity and change, and we'd take action to move towards it, and we'd all get the results that we wanted. But unfortunately, survival is a very real thing in the world around us. So in the presence of unknown, we perceive threat and danger instinctively. We always think that something bad is going to happen when we're uncertain. When that is the case, we take uncertainty and we try and predict what's going to happen. We try and make predictions about what's possible such that we can avoid unfavorable consequences. What we use to do that is our memories, and more specifically what we use is our bad memories, the memories associated with negative emotion. Now, what's interesting to note about the human mind is when we have an experience which generates a human emotion in us, we re-experience that same emotion when we remember that experience. So change and the creation of unknown and the recollection of those bad memories causes us to experience that negative emotion again, which creates anxiety. And as I mentioned earlier, anxiety is coupled with avoidance or inaction. Now, when we don't act, that also has an impact on our growth pillar. Remember, expectation and desire is also created by change. But in the presence of inaction, we can't move towards those desires. We can't fulfill those expectations, and that results in stress. So the combination of anxiety, stress, avoidance, and inaction is better known as languishing. And for those that haven't seen it in the past, there's a great TED talk by Adam Grant where he talks about the origins of languishing and what to do about it. And it's in this space that the resilience movement has been targeted. These are symptoms of a problem. And resilience has allowed us to alleviate stress and anxiety momentarily, such that we can take action to move towards results. But it is only momentarily alleviation. What we want to work on is how do we get to the root cause? How do we deal with the cause of these feelings? And that's where we have to look at our perspective. That's where we have to look at the stories that live in our unconscious mind, because it's these that we use to identify threat and to predict the negative things that are going to happen. And the work that I do addresses perspective. It takes our perspective and tries to disprove the things that we worry about, disprove that the fearsome thing is going to happen, such that we can move further towards our potential. And this is the model that my work is based upon. The ability to go from a perspective which sees danger, threat everywhere, to a perspective where we disprove that danger. And in doing so, we change the bias towards survival and increase the extent to which we're happy to be in growth. We expand the aperture of how we look at the world, recognizing that there's always more than one perspective, and in doing so, allow us to take action more readily and move towards our full potential. Now, how do I do that? It's through a two-step process, which, as I said, is based upon the work of Robert Keegan and Lisa Lahey at Harvard. They wrote a wonderful book called Immunity to Change, which for those of you who want to get more detail, you can read. It's a fabulous book. And they wrote a second book, a follow-up called An Everyone Culture, which talks about how this model can be taken into the organisation and embraced as a way to build culture of introspection and sharing my shortcomings, sharing my goals and sharing my shortcomings, such that collectively the organisation and my team can help me grow and develop. Effectively, they talk about something called deliberately developmental organisations, in which the organisations we work for become the incubator for our individual growth, and by growing individually, we improve the performance and the culture of the business at large. So the process can be boiled down into 2 steps. The first being introspection, a technique for being able to notice and explore one's thoughts and emotions as they relate to changes that are happening around about you. This builds self-awareness. It's been amazing for me to appreciate just how little we all know about ourselves at this level. There are so many things about ourselves that we don't know. And it was true for me. These stories that I had about my life, I'd forgotten about entirely. And it took some deep introspection for me to be able to bring them back to mind and ultimately to disprove them, to unlock the fear that they held for me. And that's through the process of integration. Now, the process of integration is effectively like running experiments. We create a hypothesis about the fear we have, a hypothesis about how it may not be true. And then we find an example in your life today, professional or personal, where we can test it, where we can run an experiment to generate some evidence. And that evidence is what allows us to dissipate, to disprove, to alleviate ourselves, to free ourselves from the assumptions and beliefs that hold us back. And in doing so, we develop self-belief that we can do more, we can move towards our goals more quickly, and we can move towards our goals without fear of threat or danger. Now, let me try and paint this picture more broadly with an example. So this is an example of introspection that I ran with a client recently. So there are 4 questions that we primarily go through, and these are the questions that you'll find on your action plan that accompanies this session. So I would encourage you either now or retrospectively to go through this and identify what are some of the assumptions and beliefs, what are the fears which are holding you back from a goal that you want to achieve. So for this person, a self-improvement goal that they had was to be committed to getting better at asking for feedback, because they recognized that in not doing it, it was impacting their ability to develop and impacting their ability to be a more productive member of the team. Once we establish the goal, the second thing we ask is, what are the behaviors that you're exhibiting that work against or undermine you achieving that goal? And for this person, those were avoiding people who might give them feedback and changing the conversation when they sense that feedback might be coming. Now, this is a summary. The work that I do one-on-one is a 6-hour process to go through this introspection process and integration. And there's a lot more detail that underpins it, which is drawn out through the coaching conversation. The next step, step 3, identifying worries and fears, is asking the person to consider doing the opposite of the behaviours that they're currently exhibiting and asking themselves, what is the worst thing that could happen? And here we're looking for them to find a real sense of loathsomeness, a real fear that's deep inside them. For this person, it was a worry that they'd have to accept that they're not doing a good job, that they'd worry that someone might see their shortcomings, or a real fear that they'd lose their job and not be able to get another one at this level. So we quickly be able to see that this goal they have of asking for more feedback is hampered by some really substantial fears about how their life might play out more broadly. And from here, we're able to look at what are the assumptions and beliefs at play. For this person, they assumed or they believed they didn't have the experience to do the job they were being asked to do. They assumed that people were continually thinking negatively about them. And they worried about being exposed and demoted or losing their job. Now, it quite quickly becomes evident that our unconscious mind, which is where boxes 3 and 4 has come from, can inhibit what would appear to be quite a simple goal, asking someone for some input about how they've performed. But this cascades everywhere across our life. Whatever goal you have, whatever aspiration you have, whatever change is happening, is activating these stories in your mind that you may not have previously been aware about. Now, just this act of introspection, just this act of understanding what's going on for you is called the subject-object switch. This is where we take something that we're subject to, our unconscious mind having control over us, and turn it into something object, something we can turn around in our hand, look at, question and query, and just by doing so, we free ourselves from it. So just being aware of the stories that cause you not to ask for feedback allow you to more easily ask for feedback. And that's step one of the process. Step two is integration. In this process, we start to build a hypothesis about what else might be true relative to one of the assumptions that you had. So the example in this case was embracing well-structured feedback will allow me to develop my skills and improve my performance in relationships. So that's a hypothesis based upon the assumption that this person had. The experiment that we ran was to ask for feedback related to the situation in which they thought they could have done better and to use that to their advantage. And they were looking for evidence. Now, the important thing here is to understand that the brain works based upon evidence. The stories that we tell ourselves are all evidence-based. And to this point, the evidence that we've had is all the experiences in our life previously. Primarily our experiences as children when we are most malleable. Those experiences take up residence in our brain and they drive our behaviour, as I mentioned earlier. What we want to do is create new evidence, new experiences which disprove those things which maybe were never true, but are certainly not true now in adulthood, as we are more capable, more skilled, and better supported to move through what would have perceived to have been more dangerous or threatening experiences. And once we create that evidence, amazing things happen with the dissipation of these beliefs, allowing us to do the things that we were fearful of in the past. Now, it's not just as simple as asking people to do the hard thing and looking for evidence. A large part of my work is about making people feel comfortable to do the hard thing. And because we've brought to our conscious awareness the thing we're fearful of, it allows us to build safety needs, to identify what would it take for me to be able to do this difficult thing, to be able to do this thing that I'm worried about doing, such that I can generate that evidence. And a large part of my work, as was the case here, is developing those safety nets. So for this person, it was providing them with some tools to help them remain calm when receiving feedback which was critical in nature. Developing an understanding of what is the actual feedback that I need, what structure should that take? And also the tools to be able to ask for feedback. I think on reflection in the corporate world, one of the things that we don't do enough of or do well is ask for and receive feedback. And there are some beautiful, really simple models which make feedback giving and receiving much easier that just aren't, and certainly weren't for my part, available to me in that corporate environment. But in going through these two processes, I was able to help this person move towards receiving feedback. And in doing so, their performance professionally and their level of happiness and contentment in life grew dramatically in a very short period of time. So why do this? What's the value of being an adaptable person? Well, number one, they have control over their response to change. They're no longer reactive and no longer worried about what will happen if something changes, which is incredibly important if we consider what most people are doing right now. They're trying to control their circumstances. We're trying to control the world around us such that change doesn't happen because we're worried about how we'll react, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. The reality is that that takes up a huge amount of our mental focus and a huge amount of our time. So imagine what would be possible if you were comfortable that you could respond and adapt to any change in circumstance, and what that would mean in terms of you not having to control the world around you. Spoiler alert, anyway, we can't control the world around us. Everything is subject to so much more influence by the millions of things happening in all areas of the universe, more influence than we can possibly exert on any one thing. So change is inevitable, and our ability to respond positively to it is critical. Secondly, adaptable people become able to use change to their advantage. Because they're no longer worried about what might happen and no longer trying to stay in their comfort zone, they open the aperture to possibility. In the presence of change, they see more potential, they see avenues for their exploration, they see avenues for them to do different things and try new experiences. And that's incredibly powerful, both for an individual and for organizations. As you develop organizational adaptability, it's amazing to see organizations move into new segments, move into new areas that they had never considered in the past because fear held them back. And finally, it allows people to be much more courageous in pursuit of their dreams. And as a result, people are happier, healthier, and more successful. And for me, what sums it all up is adaptability and rediscovering your adaptability, remembering the fact that you have it, it's there, it's just been concreted over, calloused over, but rediscovering that is a competitive advantage. It's going to make you a better professional, it's going to make you a better mother, father, partner, it's going to make you better in all areas of your life because you're just going to be happier and more able to just address change as it comes towards you, recognizing that it's going to happen, but also recognizing that the things you're fearful of are probably not going to present themselves. And even if they did, you're able to move beyond them. With that, I want to say thank you to listening to me talking for the best part of 40 minutes. I appreciate your attention. I hope that you were able to take some value away from it. And I would love for the next 10, 15 minutes to take any questions that anyone might have. And I'll say just quickly on the screen now, this is the way in which you can register for the practical session where I will facilitate a group through this process of introspection and integration, such that you can identify your goal for your own potential improvement and the things that may be holding you back, so we can work through them and achieve something new that might be holding you back for, as is the case with many of my clients, decades. With that, thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Stephen, thank you so much. What a terrific presentation. Honest and raw, you know, at the beginning and certainly opening up, and you know, we really appreciate you, you know, bringing those very personal experiences through the presentation. So thank you, and I certainly got a page full of notes on my action plan. If everyone would love to start sending through some questions, we'll get to those. Just before we get to those, you beat me to it, Stephen. Your workshop's coming up, so please scan that QR code. It's a development day offer, $150 for that session. And as I said, this is Stephen, I thought's brought a lot to the table in 40 minutes, but there'll be a huge amount that be able to be unpacked through that workshop session. So we can't wait to bring that to you. Secondly, our end of financial year offer is still available across all of our leadership programs as well. So I did want to raise that with you. If you've got interest in those leadership programs, please go onto our website and take a look. Okay, let's get to these questions. Once again, thank you. Sarah's said that was awesome. I'll take that as a comment, Sarah, to begin with. But the first question, what happens when your manager totally lacks self-awareness? How are they able to change and adapt without any self-awareness?
That's a challenge. That's a challenge. There needs to be a catalyst, you know, and so for me, the catalyst was the fear, the adaptable edge that I reached, the circumstantial change that caused me to be uncomfortable in myself. And unfortunately, we're often waiting for a catalyst in someone else to be able to build that self-awareness. It's difficult because telling someone they need to be self-aware is often a fear-inducing thing and will cause them to shut down. So I don't have any great advice on how you approach your manager to tell them that they are not self-aware, other than to say that the rate of change that's happening all around us, there's an inevitability about people getting to this point where they feel the need to go and work out what's going on for them. For many, and this is unfortunate, that we end up in this place of mental health issue, and we don't want anyone to get to that point. But yeah, for me, like it's unavoidable that people get to a place of discomfort where they need to do some introspection. But I don't have a great answer as to how you manage up in this situation. Sorry.
Thanks, Stephen. Hannah has a question here, and Hannah, I fear this will be answered in that workshop that we just talked about with Stephen as he unpacks things a little bit more. But she wants to know, you mentioned in the presentation about simple models for giving and receiving feedback. Do you mind sharing these models, please?
Yep, sure. So these are not things I've created, but the one which I think is most accessible and most powerful is something called situation, behavior, impact. So when we're giving feedback, what we have to be most careful with is that we're giving feedback on the process, not on the person. So when you give feedback on a person, that immediately touches their the value of self, and they'll shut down, they won't listen, and they won't react to it. But situation, behavior, impact allows us to give situation on the context, the full context of what was taking place. So what we're looking for is the situation, where did I observe the thing happening? Behavior, what did you do? And what was the impact of that on me, on you, on other people around? And if we can offer feedback in that collection of situation, behavior, impact, the likelihood that it will be impactful and well received and people will be able to do something with it is far increased. There's something as simple as that should be able to be shared with groups and teams and organizations readily, but it somehow is not. But if you just Google situation, behavior, impact feedback, you'll be able to find more detail on the model. And it's certainly been something which has been incredibly valuable for me, both in giving and receiving feedback. And when I say receiving, it's important that we receive when we are receiving feedback, that we feel the courage to ask for the information that we need to make the feedback impactful for us. And if you have that model of situation, behavior, impact, it allows you to ask the questions which are necessary for you to get that full picture. So it's valuable in presenting feedback and making sure you get what you need when you're receiving feedback.
Thanks, Stevens. Next question's from Donna. Just wanting, and this is a clarification of the model, just wanting to clarify the second part, introspection. Does Stephen mean that this exercise is to follow the first part, specifically the experiment? And how is that applied? Does he mean putting the scenarios and asking the questions, or actually putting these scenarios into practice? Beautiful.
So I can understand the confusion here because the slides said introspection twice. So let me restate. So it's a two-step process. Step one, introspection. Introspection is the process of interrogating our emotions and thoughts, getting into the unconscious mind. We're trying to create an understanding, an object understanding of the assumptions and beliefs which are driving our existing behavior. So that's introspection. That builds self-awareness. The second step is integration. Integration, we take the output of the first step, which is the assumptions and beliefs, and we feed them into the introspection process. So we build a hypothesis based upon the assumptions and belief, and we create an experiment to test that hypothesis. So the two processes are intrinsically joined together, but the first process is intended to develop an understanding of assumptions and beliefs, and the second process is intended to generate evidence to disprove them by experimenting on the assumptions and beliefs generated during introspection. Conscious that was a lot of words, but I hope it explained it. Donna, if you can maybe give us some kind of thumbs up or yes or no, that would be helpful in the chat.
Thanks, Stephen. We'll look out for Donna's reply there. Thank you, Stephen. From Jonathan, personal experiences and showing vulnerability are a great way of finding a connection with clients. Do you believe this to be true?
Yes, but more than that, storytelling is the key. When we're presenting, I'm not expecting you to remember the words I say. I'm expecting to connect with you in a way that you can interpret and understand the theory, what I need to translate what I'm saying into your experience. So storytelling and personal experience that people can relate to are critical in order to being able to get people on the same page as you. I think a lot of people who, when they're presenting, they get caught up on what are the words that I'm saying, how am I saying them, all that. The best thing is how do you get people to understand? And people understand through metaphor, story, and experience. So I suppose the short answer is yes.
Fantastic. Wonderful presentation, Stephen. What is the best way to take action once you have gone through the integration step from David?
And so the integration step itself is an action step. It's very practical in nature. So the experiment that we conceive, we will then run. So the experiments use the fabric, the substrate of your life to go and try the hard thing. So whether that is, I want to go and seek feedback, we'll go and find people in the organization from whom we want feedback, and we'll go and do the work. And that's how we make it practical. The reality is that you might need 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 experiments, depending upon the significance of the assumption and belief we're trying to deal with in order to move beyond it. But for me, what's important is maps and models. I'm not saying that you need to work with me in perpetuity to do this every time you come across a fear. What I'm about is providing you with the tools and the techniques that you can do this yourself. because mastery is developed through repetition. So in the work I do in the workshop, not only do I guide you through it, but I give you the tool to then guide yourself or guide others through it in the future. So each time you come up against some stress or anxiety or overwhelm, you've got the tool to go and work out what's actually causing this. What is the part of my perspective which is causing me to feel this way? And what is the experiment I can create to move beyond it? And when we develop mastery of that cycle of self-awareness and self-belief, that's where we change our perspective. That's where we develop what's called mental complexity. And the pinnacle of mental complexity is being able to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, which is a superpower. If you can hold your perspective and appreciate someone else's perspective and combine them to be a new perspective, that is true adaptability. And that's what happens when you start to repetitiously go through these steps and develop mastery.
Thanks, Stephen. From Raina, do you have an example of a situation where you can see change is coming, but there needs to be some facilitation to make it happen, i.e. push it over the line?
Yeah, I mean, often we can predict the change and therefore predict the fear associated to the change. So when you perhaps have people who are resisting change, we often don't ask the right questions to get to what does it actually mean to you. Often we'll get, oh, well, the customer might be unhappy or this process might break. But beneath that, there is always a personal fear. And it's the personal fear which generates the resistance. And if we can start to be more attuned to asking those questions, which can be more emotive in nature, I think we've got more likelihood to work out why the change isn't coming forward. And I think this is another shortcoming of the corporate environment that I've observed, that we leave a huge part of us, typically the emotional part, at home when we come to work, or at best we're hiding it while we're at work, which is exhausting. And I think we have to get better at bringing emotional language, bringing emotional themes into the workplace and starting to unlock the fact that everything that happens everywhere has some impact on me as a human, and that's going to have an emotional response. And if we can get better at welcoming that conversation in, we're going to get far more information about how we can move forward and how we can welcome and how we can embrace change.
Stephen, do you have any models further models that enable us, that'll, just trying to get the sentence out, that allow us to face our personal fears?
So for me, this is the model I have been most successful with. For me, this is the premier model. It's difficult to, I'll say with all of these questions, there's nuance in all of them, and I appreciate that. And I'm answering as best I can with the information given. But please, if anyone wants to dig deeper into this stuff, please set up one-on-one time with me. You can find a way to do that on my website. But I would love to dig into the nuance of this for you, because not only do I want to give you insight, but these questions are illuminating for me maybe places where I can provide a better service, a more impactful service. So this is the premier model. There's nuance to it, which you will uncover if you join the workshop. So perhaps that's the best way to answer that particular question.
Stephen, look, thank you so much. There's a couple of questions we're not going to get to. I just want to read out, I think Hannah's summed it up really nicely. Thank you so much. An incredibly informative session with lots of food for thought, particularly around the importance of introspection and the impact this has across both personal and professional realms. I think that sums it up really nicely, Stephen, of today's presentation, our second session today for our development day. Thank you so much. I've also got confirmation that Donna, it made sense to her, your response. So Donna's happy, and Raina's also sent through. Thank you for a great response, a fantastic presentation. So once again, Stephen, look, thank you so much for giving up your time today to present to our members, our corporate clients and guests today of the Institute. We're certainly privileged and honoured to have you speak. I think there's a huge amount of food for thought for us to take away. I personally can't wait for the session, for the workshop session that'll be coming on later in the piece. And look, yeah, once again, thank you for bringing today's content and presentation together.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
As we move forward, we've got our third session in 30 minutes for today's development day with Shannon Cooper. We can't wait for that. Look, if you'd like to hear more from Stephen, as I said, we've got the public workshop coming up that we've got on the screen there. But We also do in-house sessions for organisations, and Stephen, I know, does a lot of those work for organisations and employers. So if you'd like to see more of Stephen, we've also got instructional design capability at the Institute, so we can customise or contextualise this content for you alongside Stephen to make sure it's impactful as it can be for your staff and your organisation. So please inquire with the Institute, and we're very, very happy to facilitate those conversations and ensure that we can deliver to the highest standard possible. But look, thank you once again for your time today. We look forward to bringing you the third session in half an hour. Thank you again, Stephen, and we'll see you all soon. See you later.
Thank you.